Hello, everyone. Swiss precision, I think we have. It's 4 o'clock Moscow time and 9 a.m. in New York City. I am joined by Scott Ritter today again. Very, very grateful for Scott finding time for this live. But I would like to start. I see you're joining, guys. I would like to start before we jump into our conversation with Scott with something I forget to usually start with. Please join me on Locals, because it's a platform that I feel it's safe. Also, my mailing list is important. Those of you who are interested in seeing more of Moscow, follow me on Instagram, because I show you some traveling pictures, and also I am on Rumble. And if the content I provide you brings you any value, I would appreciate if you subscribe to my channel and let me hit this 80,000 on my 3-year anniversary before the end of this month. So that's a little bit administration from the beginning, but I want to say it. Welcome back, Scott. Thank you so much for joining me again for this conversation.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, Scott. I want to start with something that it's very important for me and for thousands of people who are watching you from my homeland, from Poland. Even though I'm not there now and I don't live there now, I know how much they value your bravery, they value your opinion, and they respect you immensely. But I just came across yesterday something that I want to ask you about, and I would like you to tell me, maybe later I will ask the question. So I want to read this because it's important. So I'm quoting now. Poland is one of the most racist nations on the planet. The Polish people despise Black people, despise them, hate them. And when the Russians went to Kiev, there were a lot of African students who studied in Ukrainian universities, who had to flee, and they went to the Polish border and they were not let in. The Poles were like, you ain't coming in here. We want people like you, who look like you, into Poland. Blankly racist. Scott, we had 22 interviews together. I counted this morning. I immensely appreciate you. And you know I am Polish, and you know I am not a racist. So I have to address this because my audience started to email me and send me information about it, and I felt a little bit uncomfortable. So I'm sorry to start with this, but I will not be respecting also my audience from Poland, and I'm doing a lot of those talks also for them to have more awareness about this situation in Ukraine. So can you say something to my Polish audience, please, in this regard?
100%. Watch the damn videos. Okay? If you're going to say, I'm not a racist, I'm not a racist, I believe you. But do you tolerate racism? Where was this outcry when the blacks showed up at the Ukrainian-Polish border and tried to flee into Poland out of fear for their lives? Why did Poland only open the borders to people who were white like them with blue eyes, blonde hair? Why did Poland keep black people waiting? Why did they treat them with disrespect? Why did don't ask me about whether it was racist, ask the black students whether they felt that it was racist. And just take a look at the Polish government and the stance it's taken about immigration, about protection of their borders, what they're saying about what's happening in France today with the revolt of the immigrants. This is borderline racist, rhetoric. Again, if the individual Pole says, I'm not a racist, but you're tolerating racist actions, racist dialogue from your governments, you're facilitating racism. I mean, I know it's uncomfortable to talk about, but I don't shy away from these difficult things. There are videos of American soldiers walking through Poland, black soldiers and Latinos, with Polish people hound dogging them, saying, we don't want your kind here. We don't want blacks here. We don't want your kind. We don't want you doing this, that, and the other thing. Racist. So, yeah, I'm sorry if individual Poles are insulted by this, and I'm glad you're insulted by it, to be honest. The more people that are insulted by this, the better. But don't be mad at me, because all I'm doing is putting fact out. You can say you disagree with my overall assessment. Okay, I respect that. But you can't say that my facts are wrong, because I will put the videos up there for you to see. I will put up the words of your elected officials for you to consider. And if at the end of that, watching that, you don't feel a little bit ashamed, you don't feel uncomfortable because it's blatant racism, then the problem isn't me. The problem's you.
I have to tell you that I absolutely agree that there is a portion, big portion in Poland who you can call that, absolutely. However, there is a huge group of people, majority of people who are absolutely open-minded. And another thing here, I have to tell you, Scott, this is, in my opinion, humble opinion, this entire situation with the border, especially what Poland is doing right now, the Polish-speaking government, this is another strategically political move for the coming elections. So they allow over 6 million Ukrainians to enter Poland, but now they are pretending like they are protecting the borders, okay, from those immigrations that European Union is enforcing, right? So they are doing the referendum. This is all strategic to get the voters to vote on them. No one did referendum when they had such a flood of Ukrainians. So I just wanted to start with this, and I respect you as a person, I respect our conversations, but I think I had to address it because I know that my Polish audience would be surprised if I wouldn't. So I hope.
No, I'm look. Here's the reality, honey. You know me. Check my resume. Where does it say politician? Nowhere. Okay, I don't do politics. My job isn't to make you or anybody else happy by playing word games. I've said all along, my background is that of an intelligence officer, and my job as an intelligence officer is to assemble data, to assemble facts, and then to articulate it as accurately as possible to an audience. Now, in the intelligence business, that means my commanders. But my job is never to make them happy. It's not my job. My job is to put uncomfortable data on the table, and they have to make decisions about it. Could I have said this differently in a way that didn't insult people so much? Perhaps. But frankly speaking, that would have been a disservice, because the more you soften facts, the more you deviate from reality. I'm very, very pleased that so many people were upset by this. It makes my heart warm, because the fact that you're mad that I said this means that your heart's probably in the right place, that you're not a racist, that you don't support this. But then I will come right back at you saying, what have you done to address this issue? Because understand that Poland right now, as you said, rightly so, this is politicized. This is what politicians do across the world. They play on people's ignorance to create fear, and then they use that fear to achieve a political outcome. And right now in Poland, I think the Polish people are being told to fear a flood of immigrants. But when they say immigrants, let's just be honest, because they allowed, what'd you say, 6 million? 6 million white people in. But are they going to allow 6 million North Africans in? Not on your life. Are they going to allow 6 million Africans, black people in? Never. Wouldn't even consider it. Why? Why is it okay for white Ukrainians to come in? And remember, if you're Polish, understand this, that many of those Ukrainians come from Western Ukraine, and they come from a lineage of people who slaughtered you. Slaughtered. How many Poles got slaughtered by black Africans? How many Poles got slaughtered by North Africans, by Middle East people? How many Poles got slaughtered by Western Ukrainians? Now we got a problem. So these are uncomfortable facts, but ask yourself as a Pole, why do I fear a black person more than I fear a Ukrainian? Ukrainians are the only ones in that group that have been trying to kill you on a regular basis. And yet you fear the black people, you fear the North Africans, and you're not the only ones. We're guilty of it in America as well. This isn't a Polish only problem. This is a global problem. This is a French problem. This is a European problem. But in Poland, maybe because it's the political silly season and they've elevated it, it's taken a new level. And so that's why I brought it up. And again, am I sorry that I hurt somebody's feelings? No, I'm not. Because sometimes your feelings have to be hurt in order for you to reflect on why they're hurt and then come up with solutions to the problem. And if the solution is to correct me, I'm all for that. I'm all for being corrected. I don't believe in continuing down a path that's factually inaccurate. I try to have the most accurate assessments possible. And if I'm factually wrong, if you can come back and say, no way, Ritter, we let in 300,000 black students from Ukraine, from Kiev with no problem. No problem. They came flowing in, and there were no issues. Social workers in Warsaw telling me, hey, when the black people showed up, we welcomed them into the hostels as equals. If you can show me this data, I will absorb it and I will reflect it accurately. But that's not the data set I'm seeing. I'm seeing something totally different. Maybe I'm harsh by saying the most racist. Maybe I'm not. We'll see.
But I want to end on this from me, and we go to very important current events. So we have, I wouldn't say 50-50, but kind of. A few years ago, when it was this situation with with the border with Belarus, and that immigration coming from there, and Law and Justice, the ruling party in Poland, didn't allow this, right? And still doesn't want to. We had many protests, many people against it. So I just want you to know that it's actually divided like everywhere else. And there are people who don't support this kind of government, the way how they are running it. However, in this situation, when we have July 11th, which is 80th anniversary of Volyn massacre, and we actually have, not surprisingly at all, the same day, NATO summit in Vilnius, right?
Yeah.
How convenient this date. I was thinking, like, it's intentional, Scott. To me, this is how the globalist operates. So this is the last sentence on this topic that I started. To me, this is not this country, that country. There is one government who doesn't care about people belonging to certain culture, religion, tradition, is globalist, and this doesn't matter. No borders, one government, and that's how they run it, in my opinion. That's why they create this mess. And then we have this conversation. So thank you, Scott, for—
Can I make one modification then to show that, see, I learned. So what I will do is I will modify my statement going forward. I will not say the Polish people are the most racist people in Europe, because clearly, as you have educated me, there's a significant proportion of the Polish population that is not. But I will say that the Polish government is one of the most racist governments in Europe, and I'll stand by that until proven wrong.
How about they are racist towards their own people?
Well, that's an internal Polish problem. I mean, because I think, look, it's yeah, that I don't disagree with that, but that's then why do they keep getting elected? But that's another question.
Because they know how to fake it also.
Yep, as all good politicians do. When I say good, I don't mean that in meaning that they're good people. They're good politicians, which means they're good at deceiving, lying, distorting. Okay, we can move on.
Well invested money in the right machines.
Yep.
And well invested money in the TV box. What's in it? So
yep.
Right, Scott. Coalition, let's start, we have a few topics. So let's start with the NATO, and my first question will be, so coalition of the willing. When I was getting ready to ask you this question, I came across a term that you will be very familiar with, because I didn't know that this term, coalition of the willing, was applied during the war in Iraq that was led in US by United States in 2003. So 20 years ago, look at this, 20 years ago, we are having the replay now, and we are probably, by Rasmussen's words, going to have another coalition of the willing, which is Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia. If I missed any country, you will correct me. Now, question here. Multiple question within one question. Can we expect this coalition of the willing to take any action after the NATO summit? And if so, would it mean a split of NATO? And also, how many more of the NATO summit do you think we will be witnessing after this one?
I think before we talk about a coalition of the willing, we have to, there has to be an adequate political preparation for this. What's going on between Poland and Ukraine about potential union? The talk about softening the border, especially the border between Poland and Western Ukraine, that's somehow creating some sort of political economic union between Poland and Western Ukraine. Zelensky is in discussions with the Polish government apparently about this kind of concept, because I think before you can talk about a coalition of the willing intervening, there has to be a mission for them, because frankly speaking, the mission of going into Ukraine when Russia has said, if you do that, you will die, is a suicide mission. So they have to change the political environment to say, we're not intervening in Ukraine. We're going in as a humanitarian gesture for the new union of, be ironic if they called it, Volnya. It would be sickening if they called it that, but who knows what they're going to call it, because these are sick people. But so I think there would have to be some sort of intervention, justification on humanitarian grounds. It couldn't be an intervention militarily, because let's just be honest, none of the Baltic states can generate anything that comes close to, a military capable of surviving on a modern battlefield. And the Poles can't either. The Poles have some ability to defend, but the concept of launching a multi-division offensive operation is beyond the capacity of Poland at this time. So it couldn't be designed to send in a task force that was going to engage the Russian military to push them back. It has to be about it's a political intervention with a peacekeeping force or a humanitarian security force. And if you define it in this way, then there's a possibility of a coalition of the willing being created beyond simple words and stuff. But again, what's going to protect them? Because the government of Belarus, Lukashenko, has said he will not tolerate this under any circumstance. Lukashenko is married at the hip with Russia. So if Belarus says, not only will we not tolerate this, but we need to militarily intervene, the Russians, they've built a joint force. They have tens of thousands of Russians in Belarus right now, who would be more than happy to open up a northern front against the Ukrainians, especially if it was to prevent this coalition of the willing from establishing themselves. And once this happens, what does NATO do? What does NATO do when, I don't know how big this coalition would be. It can't be that big because the Balts have nothing. So it would be primarily a Polish force, a Polish-driven force. Let's call it 15,000. What happens when 15 to 20,000, members of this coalition of the willing enter into Western Ukraine and begin to get engaged? The gloves will come off. Russia won't come in and soft handle these people. They're going to, excuse my terminology, bitch slap them. And that means dead. So what happens when the coalition of the willing start bringing home body bags that measure not in hundreds, but in thousands, and eventually in tens of thousands? Is Poland going to cry for an Article 4 intervention? See, I think this is what's going to be discussed at the NATO summit. I think the NATO summit is going to be discussing a lot of things that Zelensky doesn't want them to discuss, because they're going to be discussing about the futility of continuing this current course of action. And hopefully they will dismiss any notion of a coalition of the willing, because it's unsustainable. It can only lead to eventual conflict between Russia and NATO, which is the last thing NATO wants. So I can't imagine Poland saying, the heck with NATO, we're going to move forward. Because remember, at the same time this is happening, Poland's trying to convince NATO that it is a responsible partner, responsible enough to be included in the nuclear sharing agreement. They want NATO to expand the nuclear sharing so that B-61 thermonuclear bombs are stored on Polish soil. That's not going to happen. But what could happen is in April of 2022, this lady named Jennifer Cox, I believe her name was, she is the director of the NATO Nuclear Sharing Directorate. They came out with new guidance that said as NATO countries absorb the F-35A fighter. The F-35A, by the way, is a fighter that is capable of deploying the B-61 bomb. The Germans have, there was a lot of debate about what Germany would do because they didn't use the F-16. They used the Tornado as their nuclear delivery system, and the Tornadoes are being retired. And the Germans were like, well, then maybe we should get out of the nuclear sharing agreement. Remember back in 2020, the U.S. ambassador to Germany and the U.S. ambassador to Poland got in a little Twitter exchange where they talked about, well, if Germany doesn't want to host the nuclear weapons, we can bring it to Poland. And then last fall, the Poles said, yeah, maybe we'd like to host this. Both times they were shot down, but now the political environment's different because Russia has put nuclear weapons into Belarus. Now Poland's saying we've got to respond in kind. What might happen is that Polish pilots and Polish F-35s, once Poland receives them, will be trained to use nuclear weapons, and that Poland could find its aircraft deployed into Germany on bases where nuclear weapons are available and be integrated into this force. So, but in order for that to happen, the world has to feel comfortable with the sanity of the Polish government. And I can tell you right now that no NATO committee will approve of getting Poland involved in any aspect of nuclear weapons, NATO's nuclear weapons shield. If Poland is talking about a coalition of the willing outside of the NATO framework designed to lure NATO into a conflict with Russia. So I think there's going to be some hard realities put on the table with Poland. I hope there will be, and I would imagine that the American representative will just turn to him and say, shut down the coalition of the willing once and for all, end it, never talk about it again. And then we can talk about possibly bringing you into the nuclear shield as a participant, not as a recipient of the nuclear weapons on your soil. There's a participant in the other thing, because it's not just Poland they're talking about. They're talking about bringing in Denmark, Norway, Finland, all of whom will have F-35As, and getting them involved in sharing and integrating this concept. But for Polish participation, there's just no way NATO would ever allow this if Poland is talking about participating in a non-NATO coalition of the willing.
So Scott, before you answer how many more summits, I want to ask you a follow question in this. I'm wondering, when Rasmussen said that several weeks ago, that Poland would be one of those countries that will act on its own, you remember those words? Who is behind those words? Who made him say it? Why did he say it? Because this comes from somewhere, right?
Yeah. Look, within NATO, like any organization, there are debates, there are discussions, and the people behind this are the people who lost the discussion. NATO is a consensus-driven organization, and I believe that we know who they are: the Poles, the Balts, maybe backed by some hardliners in Italy and Germany. The British, definitely, although the British can't participate because they don't have a military anymore. But so the debate is had about Article 4, because remember, Poland has already convened an Article 4 council about the Ukrainian conflict, and Poland is already talking with NATO about Article 4 projection into Ukraine, and they've been shot down every time. The idea of creating a no-fly zone, a humanitarian corridor, all these are Article 4 discussions, and they've been shot down. And yet NATO, as they go forward, NATO is increasingly compelled to confront the fact that Ukraine has lost this war, that there's nothing more NATO can do in the current configuration of assistance to change that outcome. You can't just keep pouring weapons into a system that is incapable of adequately absorbing these weapons and using these weapons. You're just creating more death and destruction. And so as this conclusion comes to a head in NATO that we can't win the war in Ukraine, there are people saying, well, then how do we win the war in Ukraine? How can that happen? If NATO can't do it, how can we do it? How can other nations come together? And so what I see is the guys who got voted down in the NATO Military Council about Article 4 are now making the phone calls behind the back, telling Poland, "Hey, you got our backing. We'll give you a security guarantee." We don't know what a security guarantee is, but so I think you're right. There's a lot of powers that are making phone calls. I will bet you a dime to a dollar that Ben Wallace is one of the people making those phone calls, the British Minister of Defense. Very hardline posture vis-a-vis Ukraine. Remember, there's British parliamentarians now that are saying that England should consider itself at war with Russia and be prepared to act accordingly to strike targets in Russia. This is insanity, especially coming from a nation like Great Britain that has zero military capacity as we speak. But Poland is empowered by the assurances of the British government and the assurances of others. But again, the big dog is America, and I think when you saw the Biden administration shoot down the Ben Wallace nomination to be Secretary General, they were shooting down this insanity. I'm not a big fan of the Biden administration, but in this case, I think it's clear that they do not want to create a situation where NATO and Russia end up at war with one another. So, and that's the other reason why this coalition will never happen. Will never happen, because all Joe Biden has to do is call up any one of their governments and say, "We'll just stop supporting you. If you do this, you'll never get another piece of military equipment from us. American troops will withdraw, and we just don't care about you because it's not Article 5. We don't want you to think that there's any Article 5 protection here. You're on your own." And there's not a single nation out there that will say, "That's good with us." Poland would back down and say, "Oh, again, I just have to make one phone call to the Minister of Defense or the Prime Minister or even the President and just say, how do you say F-35 in Polish?" And he'll be struggling. I say, "You can't, because it doesn't exist. You'll never have them." "How do you say M1 Abrams?" "You can't, because it doesn't exist. You'll never have them. We're not going to give you anything, nothing, zilch, zero, if you continue this insanity." And that'll be the end of it. So I think that's what's probably going to come out of this summit. Now, the question about this summit, I think that this will probably be the last wartime summit for NATO. I honestly believe that this conflict will be, the military aspect of this conflict could very well be over by the end of summer, early fall. The Ukrainian military is heading towards collapse. The casualty levels are unsustainable. Russia has 180,000 reserves that are trained for offensive operations that have yet to be committed to this battle, who are starting to be mobilized in that direction. I think by the time they receive all the add-ons from the rest of Russia, this will be closer to 250,000 troops, and Ukraine will have nothing to stop them. And so I think militarily, this war will be done by the end of summer, early fall. I could be wrong, but that's just where I'm heading. Politically, how to wind this down politically is another question that could take more time. But I think this is the last wartime summit for NATO. And then as NATO is compelled to think next year about the political consequences of this war, how to deal with what has happened, we're going to start to see the fracturing of NATO. And then I think as NATO begins to fracture and the reality of what it costs to build up the 300,000 rapid reaction force that Jan Stoltenberg says he wants just sinks in, and they realize they can't do it. I think you're going to see the French and the Germans start to articulate in favor of supporting a new European security framework discussion with Russia that will de-emphasize NATO. The United States will have to rethink the continued presence of these Aegis Ashore systems in Poland and Romania, these anti-ballistic missile facilities, as they are compelled to enter into real arms control discussions with the Russians, which will be inclusive of anti-ballistic missile systems. And you're going to see NATO begin to shrink. And as NATO shrinks in terms of its relevance, I think people are going to recognize that NATO is a Cold War relic, a dinosaur that no longer has legitimate reason to exist. It'll take a while to unwind all that. It could take a decade. It could take more. But NATO, this is the last wartime summit I believe NATO will ever have. Every summit afterwards will be about dealing with the political consequences of their strategic defeat at the hands of Russia, and then NATO seeking to adapt accordingly to a new political reality in Europe that seeks, I don't want to use the word accommodation with Russia, that's a little too strong, but seeks political or peaceful coexistence with Russia, as opposed to the previous NATO policy of antagonism. So yeah, I think we could see easily 10, 15, 20 more years out of NATO, but its relevance is going to start to go to the point where it no longer makes sense to continue the alliance.
Thank you so much for this. I wanted to hear, actually, you said 15, 20 years, and you said this is the last summit in regards to this war. And when you were saying this, I felt, okay, so the next one will be war with China or something else?
No, NATO's done. NATO's finished. NATO's finished. Look, France, Emmanuel Macron said, don't even bother opening up a NATO office in Japan. Jan Stoltenberg can talk about expanding to the Pacific all he wants and draw big maps, but the French went North Atlantic Treaty Organization. There ain't no P in there. There's no Pacific. We're not doing that. And as NATO reflects on biting off more than it can chew with Ukraine, they're not going to get involved in China. I think you're going to see the European Union become more involved with China, not from a military standpoint, but from an economic stability standpoint. The Chinese premier just visited Germany, and some harsh realities came out of this. Because Germany is, their intelligence services, which are heavily politicized, by the way, just wrote a national security strategy that puts China as the number one threat to Germany. Amazing. But China's the threat. And then they came up with I forget the exact three terms used, but they are partners, but they're competitors. And then there's another one that's even more, harsh. You can't be all three. And that's the stupidity of it. That Germany believes that they can be friends and enemies at the same time. They can't. Germany speaks of a policy of they don't call it the decoupling. It's risk reduction. We're de-risking or something. There's some cute term they use out there, meaning that they can't be so heavily invested in China that if relations with China went south and the economic plug was unpulled, that Germany would collapse, that they have to diversify, which is cute. I like the idea, Germany. That's good. You guys went to college, apparently. You studied politics and political science, but you didn't study economics, because the German companies right now had to go to the Schultz government and say, hey, you want us to de-risk with China, but we can't. You see, de-risk means diversification. There's nothing we can invest in Europe, in Germany, that makes money. Every investment you want us to make in Europe and Germany will lose money over the course of several years. The only place we make money is China. And therefore, in order to achieve your economic goals, of offsetting de-risking in China, the only option we have is more investment in China. It's a vicious little circle there. In order to pull out of China, you have to invest in things that make money, but the only thing that makes money is further investment in China. And that's the reality of it. So this notion that Europe is going to support an American war against China is absurd. Europe, will never support it because they can't. Their economies are too closely linked. Germany can't decouple. They want to. Everybody talks about it. But you know who else can't decouple? America can't decouple. Tony Blinken just went to China on his knees, because they realized they had screwed up royally. I think the Pentagon finally gave the briefing they should have been giving all along to the Biden administration, which says since 2018, we've run war games against China and we lose every time. And rather than us doing things militarily that narrow the scope of our defeat, everything we do only broadens it. And right now, it's not even close. Any talk of a military engagement with China is preordained to fail. That's not me saying this. Is Lieutenant General Hinault. He's an Air Force general who's responsible for these kinds of plans and wargaming. And he's just being straight up saying, we can't win. Can't win at all. Never will happen. And I think the Biden administration went, well, good gracious, all these policies that we've been implementing, trying to encourage the independence of Taiwan and seeking to confront China and South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits are heading us towards a military confrontation. We can't win. So Blinken went to China. And take a look at what happened. Gets off the airplane. Is he greeted with welcome arms? Hey, buddy, Tony, you're the man. Nope. He got some minor official from some, rinky-dink little department to greet him at the airplane, which said, that's where you stand right now. You don't get the foreign minister. You don't get a deputy foreman. You get a deputy to the deputy of the assistant of the secretary of the janitor coming out to greet you. I'm being a little exaggerating. Then he had to work his way up. He had, I think, 30 hours of meetings, but they weren't 30 hours of meetings with Xi Jinping. He only got 30 minutes with Xi Jinping. He had to work his way up, basically cowering for each one, kowtowing, apologizing, apologetic. I'm sorry. Yes. I'm sorry. Yes. No Taiwan independence, one China policy, da, 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 da. And then, okay, I'll answer that. Then he finally got his meeting with Xi Jinping, 30 minutes, and then that was it. And notice there was no joint press conference. Normally at the end of something like this, Tony Blinken will be standing there all smiley and his Chinese counterpart, and they're going to agree on things. There's Tony Blinken out there explaining to the world why America sucks and why America had to change its policies. And the fact is, the Biden administration just realized they can't go to war against China. Not only that, they just sent Secretary of Treasury Yellen to China on bended knee, by the way. She got off the airplane and the same thing. Nobody's there to meet her, just some little minor functionary who held her hand and shook for an uncomfortable period of time, saying, but she has to go over there and, try and square the same thing to Germans, because she is the one saying, well, we need to de-risk our engagement with China. We can't de-risk. The Chinese have such a solid grip on the global economy right now in terms of the supply chains, et cetera. They have been thinking so strategically while Europe and the United States have been pouring billions into military stuff. The Chinese have been out there building global supply networks, building economic relationships based upon trust, not sanctions, based upon mutually beneficial arrangements, not singular only for America relationships. Remember, Marco Rubio, I don't like him, but he said something honest recently about Brazil, because the Brazilians started to dump the dollar and started to do trade in Chinese yuan and that. And he said, they can't do that. If they do that, then we have no control over the Brazilian economy and we won't be able to sanction them. Wow. Thank you, Marco. Thank you for being honest, because that's the entire American approach. And the Chinese right now are just saying, we're done with sanctions. We're done with you. We're done with this game. Look at Iran. Iran just became a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, there's a whole clique of analysts out there saying that means nothing because Russia and China are scared of American sanctions and they're not going to invest in Iran out of fear. Guys, it's over. Iran was at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum entering a deal with Russia to do what? To build a rail network connecting Russia down through the southern transport corridor through Iran to Chabahar, a port that's going to be built up to become a major economic hub. Russia is going to help them build this rail network so there's connectivity, strategic thinking. The Chinese are doing the same, bringing rail traffic through into Iran. And rail traffic goes both ways. That means that Iran will now be able to also insert itself into the Russian market, into the Eurasian market, this giant economic engine that's functioning, has more people than Europe and the United States combined, more economic potential, meaning that China doesn't need America anymore. That's the future. And so Yellen's coming in on hands and knees saying, we're relevant, we want to be part of the Chinese relevancy now. Now she'll spin it in a way that is sellable to the American public, because we don't like to admit that we're totally reliant upon the Chinese economy, but we are. So is the rest of the world. That's the reality. There will be no war in Taiwan. I can say that safely right now. And the other main reason is that the Taiwanese people don't want this war. Yes, they have a government, the DPP, the current female president, but they're going to lose. They have an election in January of 2024, and they're going to be replaced by the Kuomintang party, the opposition. And what has the opposition been saying? Peaceful coexistence with China. They're over there in China right now talking about economic cooperation, all that stuff. That's the future. That's the future of Taiwanese-Chinese relationships, not the policies that the Biden administration has been trying to push on people, policies that lead inevitably to a conflict that the U.S. military now says we can't win and we will never win. So I think, this idea that Europe is somehow going to flex its great big European muscles in the Pacific and back an American conflict with Taiwan, I was worried about that. I mean, you and I have had this conversation before, and I have to tell you that I have changed. My position has changed dramatically since the position I held in, say, September of last year, in 2022. I think at that time I said there's a chance there could be a nuclear conflict between China and the United States by the end of the year. And there was. We're dangerously close to that. Nancy Pelosi traveled over there. There was a lot of risk. But the thing that changed that was the Kuomintang party. The thing that changed that was that the DPP, the power, had an election, a parliamentary election in November of 2022, where instead of focusing on domestic problems like potholes and internet and stuff, they decided to say, we're going to make this about cross Taiwan Straits policy, about the Chinese policy. We're going to have a referendum on this big aggressive policy push we've been having. And the Taiwanese people went, we don't want to have anything to do with that. And they voted them out. And they brought in the Kuomintang. And as soon as I saw that, I went, Taiwan doesn't want this war. Taiwan doesn't want this war. And if Taiwan doesn't want it, it ain't going to happen. And that caused me to change my assessment. And ever since then, we've been thankfully seeing an awakening. There's been a certain element of the American military that's been pushing strong for this. You only have to listen to the commander of the Pacific Fleet, his words. You have General Minahan, Transportation Command, telling people to pull out a pistol and practice shooting targets in the head, and things of that nature. But fortunately, the people responsible for coming up with the plans have come out and said, we can't win. There's just no scenario that we can win. We've gamed it all out. We can't win. And I think the Biden administration has woken up to this reality, and they're trying to adjust accordingly.
Thank you, Scott. I want to say here something on that note from someone like me who doesn't really have that much knowledge. I just use my common sense, because when you look at first of all, they're trying to hide it, right, for so many years, how China has developed and continues to develop, and the infrastructures. I mean, it's incredible. Even if you just go on YouTube and watch the videos of people who are there and what they are showing, the metros and the airports. And there's like an older airport, I think 5 years old or 2 years old, that was built on the top of the mountain, and now it's circulating, which is like old news already, how they were able to build that incredible landing and airport on the top of the mountain in China, but and they built the bridges, and it's like enormous expansion. And then you look at it and it's like, makes common sense. Silk Road, literally you have all land that's connecting Europe. You can create this. There is no water in between. You can have such a fantastic road for any commerce, right? To prosper, for the goods, for transportation. But I think eventually we will get there. It just might take time. But can we go back to Ukraine and Zelensky, who is losing his cool with his gang lately, I will say. The president from Bulgaria, meeting, as you know. So here is my question. Does Ukraine has any ability to attack that nuclear plant? Because I still believe this is where the danger is right now. And if so, what that attack could be like, in your opinion? Yeah, I mean, how possible this is, that this will be maybe the final, final act from them, I would say.
Look, Ukraine's been talking about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant from the very beginning, ever since Russia took it over in March of 2022. If you remember, I think in the early summer of 2022, Ukraine was accusing Russia of shelling the nuclear power plant and of stationing military equipment. And then the International Atomic Energy Agency sent a delegation over there, and those accusations went away. But Ukraine has always been seeking international intervention. They've always been trying to get the IAEA to take control of the facility, international peacekeepers to take control of the area around the facility, as an indirect means of reasserting Ukrainian control over territory. And this might have been at least a logical, policy point up until September of 2022. But that's when Zaporizhzhia held a referendum and voted to become part of Russia. Now, people can say that wasn't legitimate. It doesn't matter. From the Russian perspective, that's a legal referendum. Constitutionally, they've acted upon it. They've absorbed those territories. And from a Russian perspective, the Zaporizhzhia Oblast is Russia. So any Ukrainian effort to insert a foreign force onto Russia is doomed from the start. It just isn't going to happen. So Ukraine's had to up the ante and come up with yet another fabrication about Russian explosives on top of nuclear reactors. But the IAEA even went through that and said, no, we didn't see anything like that. There's talk about a Tochka-U missile, with a dirty bomb that's going to be fired to spread radiation to make it look like the Russians did it. It's not the first time we've heard this. Remember, they were supposed to do that against Chernobyl and do the same thing. It's stupid because anybody advising them will say, guys, the fingerprints will all have our fingerprints on them. The world will abandon us. And I guarantee you the world will abandon you. It might have been questionable whether the world would have abandoned Ukraine back in the fall of 2022 had they tried to do something like that. But today, there's no doubt about it. The world is tired of Ukraine. You saw the meeting with the Bulgarian president. There's Ukraine exhaustion right now. NATO is trying to talk about how this war doesn't get lost, not how we can win the war, but how we avoid getting a strategic defeat in this war. And one of the things that apparently is happening is there's behind the scenes discussions with the Russians about how to bring about a negotiated end to this. Apparently there's retired national security officials from NATO countries and from the United States meeting with Lavrov, trying to articulate, what an end game could look like. So I can guarantee you this: if Ukraine ever pulled something off like this, the media might do what they always do with headlines: "Russia did it," but those will be immediately swept away because it's unsustainable. Ukraine did it. Then the world dumps Ukraine. And so,
Scott,
go ahead.
How this? I can ask you how that, because this is absolutely your area of expertise. How that nuclear plant is protected from any attacks? What is it really?
Well, first of all, it's designed to, be hit by an airplane. So if a commercial airliner fell from the sky on top of the nuclear reactor, it's designed to receive that and not catastrophically fail. The other thing is these reactors are a different design than Chernobyl. Everybody's like, it'll be a Chernobyl, another Chernobyl. No, it's a different design, more safety features. And then I think you have to realize that of the 6 reactors, 4 are non-functioning. They've been shut down. They aren't operating. One operates at a very limited result, and I think the other one operates at 50% capacity. So they're not. You have Russian experts from Rosatom there overseeing this. You have Russian safety people there. Every question you have about potential X, Y, and Z, they've war gamed it out. What if this happens? What do we do? What if this happens? What do we do? There won't be any surprises. So if Ukraine does anything, the Russians will have a counter to it. The Russians aren't in the business of allowing this to create an environmental disaster. So I think people can rest easy. This has been one of those propaganda-driven fear campaigns run by the Ukrainians against the West to try and get Western pressure for an intervention into Zaporizhzhia. But Russia is not in the business of allowing intervention, and Ukraine's not in the business of slitting its own wrists, which would happen if they attacked the nuclear power plant. A lot of what you've read in the media about, nuclear fallout and contamination, et cetera, it's unrealistic. It just, I'm not going to say that there's no chance of radioactive contamination, but I would say that the Russians are in a position because they have a vested interest. This is now Russian soil. They have a vested interest in mitigating this potential. They've saturated the area with air defense, so any Ukrainian missile coming in would get shot down, and they have the means to mitigate any successful attack on a coolant pond that hit one of the uranium rods that are in there and cause it to break open. They can contain that. That's a containable event. So, I would say that.
What's the danger, Scott? If there is an attempt and there will be some form of damage or that plant is affected by whatever Ukraine is trying to do, what could be the side effect for the region and maybe the closest regions there, or overall what is the danger? I know it depends on the scale, right? But what would you say is the danger there?
I'd say there's like a 0.00001% chance of a catastrophic event, because you can never rule it totally out, human error and things like that. But I trust the professionalism of the Russians. I trust their own contingency planning, and I would say that there's a 90% chance of nothing happening, and there's and then the remaining 10% is would be a gradient going up to the 0.0001 catastrophe, where you'll have limited contamination, limited radioactive fallout. But even if there were radioactive fallout, I think it'll be very contained. It'll be contained to the site itself or its immediate environs. It's not going to spread throughout the region. It's not going to spread throughout the world.
Thank you so much. That actually is good to know. I have a question now about, we actually already mentioned about Poland being so eager. Oh boy, Polish speaking government being so eager to have those nuclear weapons, right? Stationed in Poland, nuclear sharing program. And you say that it's not going to happen. However, as I'm not an expert, but I feel like that's what barely conscious Biden was saying to Duda when he was visiting. He said, don't you worry, we send you weapons. This is just my, maybe sarcastic, but I feel like it was the case. So let's say they're not going to have those weapons, which is great. But, for so long, we have all those troops that came not just from United States, but a lot of American soldiers that are in Poland right now on the border with Belarus. I want to ask you, do you know what is the number? How many of those soldiers are there? And how long do you think they will stay there and what they are going to do? Because I don't think they're just going to be there and nothing will happen. Just my sense. So what action they will be involved in while they are there? And how many, Scott, if you know, approximately?
Well, I mean, the United States has deployed a rotational brigade, a heavy brigade into Europe. Normally, that brigade is broken up into components that go train elsewhere. But now we're in sort of an operational footing. So I would imagine that the bulk of that brigade and perhaps the Stryker brigade out of Germany is there. So what we're talking, 15,000 American troops in Poland right now, including the headquarters and support elements. And that sounds impressive, but it's really not. First of all, that's it. It's not like that's 15,000 and then there's 100,000 over in Germany waiting to come in and immediately reinforce them. So what can 15,000 American troops do? They can serve as a tripwire again to deter any thought amongst the Russians and the Belarusians that once they defeat Ukraine to keep rolling to Warsaw. There's a lot of people in Warsaw. They're like, what happens if they keep coming? And what the Americans are saying is they're not going to, because we have this tripwire force there. Because in order to kill 15,000 Americans, you're going to have to require the Russia to put full effort on, and that's politically impossible. Russia has no desire to go to Warsaw, by the way. It just isn't there. But that's all this force is good for. It can't carry out any sustained offensive operations. Again, I would just advise people to take a look at, let's say you wanted the Americans to go into Western Ukraine. How deep into Western Ukraine? Every kilometer that you go into Western Ukraine, you're a kilometer further away from your supplies. The Americans have not tactically deployed their fuel, their ammunition, etc. So, but the moment they go into Ukraine, that means that their rear areas are going to be susceptible to strike from precision-guided Russian munitions, which there is no defense against. And so America would immediately lose all of its fuel, all of its ammo, all of its maintenance, boom, gone. And so as these forces go in and things break down, they can't maintain them. If they engage the Russians, they run out of ammunition. They have to stop moving because they run out of fuel. This is just the reality of war. Normally, if you're going to have this kind of operation, these forces would have a corps-sized logistical support capability, which would have combat spread this stuff. That requires a lot of trucks, by the way. The more you break things up into dispersal areas, the more transportation you need to bring them in. We don't have those trucks. We haven't done this. So people just need to be smarter, look at reality and say, it ain't going to happen, because it can't happen. It's a force of deterrence. It's a tripwire force designed to convince the Poles that the Russian investment into overcoming this is too great, that Russia won't do it. That's it. The Americans aren't there to go to war against Russia. They're not there to invade Ukraine. They're there to help the Polish people sleep better at night, to say Russia won't invade Poland. But even if the American troops weren't there, Russia's not going to invade Poland. Russia has no desire to invade Poland. It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. So they are just hanging out there.
That's it. They're hanging out there. They're not going to be used for because they can't. They can't. I mean, again, I just ask people that have any military experience to tell me how they could be employed realistically in a war. Remember, it's General Cavoli himself, the commander of U.S. forces in Europe and the commander of the Supreme Allied Commander, who said that the scope and scale of the violence taking place in Ukraine today between the Ukrainians and the Russians is beyond the imagination of NATO. And if it's beyond your imagination, that means you couldn't have prepared for it, because you prepare for that which you imagine. You imagine war is going to be this, but the reality is war is that. And if you haven't prepared for that, you can't do that. And NATO hasn't prepared for that. The United States hasn't prepared for that. They've prepared for this, and this is no longer relevant. So until that changes, and Cavoli said it would take years for that to change. It's not going to change overnight. But we don't need to worry about American offensive action in Ukraine, NATO offensive action in Ukraine. NATO has no offensive capability. Militarily. Politically, they can offend everybody.
Yes, that's for sure. Two questions, one from me and the one from the viewer here. So last question from me is this. Is there, in your opinion, still any chance that perhaps around this NATO summit, when Zelensky is not, well, Ukraine is not accepted into NATO, there will be some attempt with some kind of nuclear strike or other form of very dangerous strike around this NATO summit? Any attempt?
Who attacking whom? Who attacking whom?
No, you know who, Ukraine. False flag somewhere.
No, Ukraine is they're in a very difficult situation, because a false flag is designed to rally support to them. And right now, Europe is rallying in support of Europe. And what I mean by that is, I think there's a growing recognition that this war in Ukraine is lost, that there's nothing that can be done to resolve this. Politically, they're saying all the right words about we will continue to support, etc. But the reality is they're desperately looking for an off-ramp. Any effort by Ukraine to escalate the violence in hopes of getting NATO engagement will backfire. I believe it'll cause NATO to even break further with Ukraine and abandon. And I think these are some of the conversations that are taking place behind the scenes with Zelensky, which is why he's increasingly angry-looking, sulky, etc. Because I think it's hitting home that it's over. It's over.
So nothing to fear as far as this, and I think there is not so much more business opportunity for him, huh? And others.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's crazy right now because what he's saying right now to Bulgaria, and I think he's going to Turkey right now, is he's asking for munitions. He's asking for weaponry. But in the past, he was able to come in with a big briefcase of American money and say, okay, we're here. We're going to buy this. So the Americans are going to send you money and you're going to get rich sending us these weapons. But now he's coming in because there is no more money, no money. And he has to go in and say, no, we want you to give us these weapons as a loan. So you're going to loan it to us, just write it down on the book and say, we owe you this much money. And we'll give you a good interest rate too. But it's fake money, which they'll never see. So the stuff they're going to give Ukraine will be destroyed on the battlefield. Ukraine will never repay because Ukraine's going to be defeated. And that's why Bulgaria said, yeah, no, we're not, we can't do that. And I think all the nations of Europe are starting to come down to that because they can't make money out of this anymore. There's no more American money. There's no more European Union money. And so they're being asked now to front the money through giving the stuff in a loan. And they know the loans will never get repaid. No bank would go along with this. I mean, if I told a bank, I just got my unemployment notice. And by the way, I'm physically unable to ever work again, but I'd like you to give me a nice big loan so I can buy this house that I want to live in. And I'll agree to whatever percentage rate you want to. You want to charge me 20, 30%? Go ahead. The bank would say, well, no, it's not a good investment. You're not going to be able to hold on to this house. You have no job. You're not going to ever get a job. You ask us to front you for a home that you can't afford. You won't even make the first month's payment. Why would we give you this home? The answer is they won't. And that's what Europe's starting to tell Zelensky. No, we're not doing it.
Hey, Scott, last question here. As you can read here, I hope you can read it. How will Russia deal with cluster munition? You can see it here. Yuks, I think you say, have been using for years in Donbass, and the US stating they have disposed of the remaining chemical weapons. We know where they dispose of their wastes. So could you please?
It's two quite. Look, the United States has published reports that they have wrapped up the chemical weapons disposal activities. I believe in Colorado there was a facility that there was destroying the chemical weapons, but I'd have to triple check on that. So that's that. I mean, you can believe it or not believe it. There is the Chemical Weapons Convention. There will be international inspectors there to verify this, to ensure that America's in compliance and so forth. About cluster munitions, let's just be straight up honest here. It's not an illegal weapon. There is a convention out there that many nations have signed, over 100 nations have signed it, I believe, that says that they will not use cluster munitions because they find them to be inherently cruel to civilian populations, especially because of the high dud rate. So you fire these cluster munitions and so breaks up into small little bomblets that come down, and ideally they all impact and blow up and kill everybody there, but they don't. There's a high dud rate. They stay around. Kids will come around later on, play with them, blow up and die. A farmer will come out and try and plow the field, blow up and die. A mule will hit it. A dog will hit it. A housewife will go forward to pick an apple, but she'll die because that's what happens with cluster munitions. They're the the gift that keeps on giving, so to speak. The United States has not signed this. Russia has not signed this. Ukraine has not signed this. So welcome to reality, people. Cluster munitions are being used by the Ukrainians. I don't know if the Russians use it, but the Russians use some pretty horrible weapons themselves. The TOS-1, TOS-2 flamethrower weapons, they call it thermobaric weapons that are slaughtering the Ukrainians on the field of battle. Massive fireballs that suck the lungs right out of people. War is ugly. Killing people is ugly. Cluster munitions is just another way of killing people. So I think the first thing we have to do is stop talking about the illegal weapon. It's not an illegal weapon. If Russia wants to make that case, then Russia needs to sign the convention and say that we'll not use cluster munitions. But I think Russia has cluster munition weapons. I don't know if they've been using them in Ukraine, but they exist. Russia hasn't signed it. Ukraine hasn't signed it, so they are using cluster munitions. Several European countries have provided Ukraine with cluster munitions that are being used on multiple launch rocket systems. The cluster shell that's being provided is a 1987 shell. I was in the artillery at that time. I used DPCIBM all the time in training. It was a wonderful weapon. I mean, it has, when you look at your tables, when you want to achieve if you have a certain target category and certain terrain features, DPICM becomes an ideal weapon because you can spread death and destruction on a given area and get a tighter saturation of kill probability, PK. That's what you want. Probability of kill every time you fire. DPICM increases your PK. Remember, we're at war here. The idea is to kill the enemy. And cluster munitions, DPICM does that. It's a 1987 weapon. It's not a new weapon. It's not a miracle weapon. It's not going to change the outcome of this conflict at all. DPICM was used. One of the advantages of it was fire against massed armor. So if I had out in 29 Palms, California, we would have scenarios where a notional Russian threat, Soviet threat, was coming in with massed armor, and you'd find the terrain feature, for instance, crossroads, where you could get as many of their vehicles clustered there as possible, and then you would saturate that with a battalion's worth of DPICM, each battery doing a battery 6. That means each gun is firing 6 DPICM rounds. Boom, massed fire, schedule of fires come in and saturate the area, and the idea is that you take out all these vehicles. Beautiful, baby. It's war. That's what you want to do. Wham. You know what the Russians don't do anymore? Massed armor tactics. Right now, we see the Russians coming with one tank here, a handful of vehicles here, but the target set's not there. So what you're going to be firing DPICM at, a single vehicle, suddenly your PK factor is not as assured as it was. The other thing is, every time the Ukrainians fire an artillery shell, that artillery piece becomes a target for Russian counter battery fire. The Russians right now are slaughtering Ukrainian artillery. I will make the following prediction. Ukraine will run out of artillery pieces before they run out of DPICM shells. Here's the other thing about the DPICM shells. They have to arrive in Ukraine. That means they have to come in on a line of communication. They have to be sent to an intermediate storage area where they're broken down into the various packets and sent out to other warehouses. And Russia's shown a proclivity now to identify these warehouses and bomb them. But my guess is that anywhere from 50 to 80% of the DPICM will never make it to the front lines because they'll be destroyed by Russian interdiction. When they get to the front lines, they'll be handed to a unit that'll start firing them, but then that gun's going to be destroyed. So they're going to have a bunch of unfired DPICM rounds scattered around the battlefield because the artillery gun that was supposed to shoot it is dead and the crew that was supposed to operate it is dead. This is what's going to happen. It's not going to change the outcome of the war. It will kill more Russians. There's no doubt about that. More Russian soldiers will die because of this. But it's not going to kill enough Russians to change the outcome of this war. And as I said, the Russians have a tremendous ability to hunt down and kill Ukrainian artillery, which means, I'll just repeat myself, Ukrainians are going to run out of guns before they run out of DPICM rounds.
Thank you so much for explaining. I really appreciate. I hope the person who asked is pleased with this very good answer. Scott, just one reflection from me. Maybe we can end here. you're so aware of those weapons that are currently in Poland that cross the border, right? You know how many of those weapons, and lately more and more, there are actually articles, I have to read some of those on my channel, how many pieces have been found, 400 pistols, this and that. I really don't know those names. I'm not a professional in this topic, but I have this strong sense, Scott, that what they are doing, because there's this, let's put this in the diplomatic words, the discontent with our new guests in Poland is going higher and higher. So what the Polish-speaking government might do, they might turn some part of those people against Poland. And I just wonder, you know, those weapons, there is another purpose besides the business, right? Besides the money making. This can create another inner conflict within the country because the tensions are rising, let me tell you, more and more. So do you have any thoughts on this, in your opinion, how you feel about it? I know it's, again, not, it's my last question, I always say it, but I was just thinking about those weapons because it's on massive scale at this point.
Well, I think there's a couple questions built into that. First and foremost, you're right to point out the danger of transferring so many weapons, especially from your perspective. I mean, I would say that Poland's better off sending tanks to Ukraine than sending pistols or rifles. Why? Because the tank's going to stay in Ukraine. You can't hide a tank. The pistol, however, is going to fall off the back of the truck. And then somebody who's not supposed to have them are going to start selling them to people that shouldn't have them. And there's going to be a reverse flow of these weapons. They've already found weapons that were sent to Ukraine. They're finding them in France as part of this unrest being used against French police, etc. So the weapons are already there in the black market. And Poland, I know the Poles don't want to hear it. You guys got a huge black market. You got a huge organized crime capability, and it's been empowered by this war. War always brings out corruption. Always brings out. There's a lot of money being made right now by people in Poland who are running humans and are running ammunition. They're running weapons. All the things that normally drugs. The people that do that for a living are now making a lot of living running guns and running mercenaries, running humans. Human trafficking of the worst kind is happening on Polish soil. This is all happening, and these weapons are flowing back into Poland, and you can't guarantee that they're going into the right hands. Is this designed to happen? I can't get into conspiracy theory, meaning that I'm not going to sit here and say, I know the Rothschilds are doing this and that. I don't know that. What I do know is that we're not doing enough to prevent it, meaning that when you agree to supply weapons to Ukraine, it should be done responsibly. There's more. If I were in a business and my job was to provide a commodity to a chain of businesses, so I'm going to give you certain things, and then you're going to put them on the shelves and sell them. There's more accountability for what I give you, how it's tracked. You sold it. We now have to talk about the money. I gave you $10,000 worth of stuff. It was designed with a profit rate of 25%, which means there should be $12,500 back. I need $12,500. If you're not giving me $12,500, you have to account for where each item went, why I'm not getting my money back on it. Was it damaged? Was it destroyed? There has to be inventory control. Businesses do this for a living. And so when you are supplying weaponry to people, the same thing. I'm giving you 1,000 pieces of X. Okay, it's delivered. Each one's trackable. Should have a little barcode on it that's scanned in. So I certified I gave it to you. You signed for it. It goes into a warehouse. When you store it in a warehouse, the warehouse foreman signs for it, confirms. He doesn't assume. You don't say, I'm giving you 1,000. He goes, got you, boss, 1,000. He goes, yep, unpack them. Let's count them. 1,000, good, pack them up, secured. And as they dole them out, it's all accounted for. You take 10, you take 15. That's the way the real world works. We're not doing that. We're just giving it to them, handing it to them. There's no accountability. And because Ukraine is the most corrupt place in the world right now, there's Ukrainians who are just in the business of making money. They don't care about winning the war. They care about how much money they can make, and they make money by having guns fall off the back of the truck and selling those guns on the black market to create a profit. And the fact that this is being allowed to happen is either done deliberately. I think it's done deliberately. But
Yes,
to what end? To what end? Is it done deliberately because try and solve the problem makes it impossible to supply the weaponry, or is it done deliberately because there's some master scheme to destabilize Europe? I can't answer that question. I think what we can say is it's done deliberately, and we still have to find out why.
Well, I think, if I may share my thoughts with you before we end this live, is because those who are in power are losing it big time, and nothing else can prevent them from losing this power than announcing another state of emergency. This country, this country, this country. And how you do this state of emergency when there is such a chaos that you cannot control anymore, and then you have an excuse. So this serves its purpose, doesn't it? To have so many of those weapons and create, give it into the wrong hands and create that chaos, how they say, order out of chaos, right?
Yep. No, I order out of chaos. I'm not here to disagree with you, Anya. It's just sound. It's sound logic, sound assessment. I just don't. One, I guess I'm still naive enough to say that that's just so horrible that it doesn't make any sense. What government could ever?
They are horrible, Scott.
But then again, I reflect on my own government and the callous indifference we have for the rest of the world, and I say, well, gosh, my government can do it, so why not the Polish government?
And we will end it here. So we can, as far as nuclear attack, relax. As Scott Ritter said, it ain't gonna happen. And
of course, watch tomorrow what happens. But we'll see.
I mean, we have 4 more days until this. Yeah. Yeah, you never know, because if they lose their cool more and more, this is the only thing, is you don't know how they're gonna react. But I believe that we will be fine. It's just financially we might go through another experience, and that's a different story. Today I say thank you, Scott, again for joining me. This was number 23 interview. I hope we will continue.
Not if you keep calling me a racist. I'm joking.
I didn't call you a racist. Never.
I know you didn't. I'm joking. I'm joking with you.
Someone called me a racist a few weeks ago because I made a comment about Chinese bus. I mean, long story, but anyway, so you never know, but I wanted to address this because it was important. So thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Very much appreciate, and please be, for the future lives with different guests or Scott, please be careful with your comments, because they do trigger the artificial intelligence that sometimes is smarter than many people are, unfortunately. And all the links to find Scott you have already under our live. So you have his book, link to his book, and also his YouTube channel and his website, where you can find him, support him, and see other videos of his. And by the way, before I let Scott go, Scott, fantastic video with those 2 prankers. I loved it. Yeah. I loved it. It was so good. They were great.
No, that was an amazing show. First of all, if you probably noticed, I was more relaxed. Talking to them because it's not. I'm not a professional host. I can't do this as well as anybody else, and I always get a little too, official and all this with the, with officialdom. But these guys were too, these were honest, down to earth, guys, pranksters, comedians. So I was much more relaxed, and I think that helped the interview. And they were just great guests. They were very, they were entertaining. They were serious. So I got lucky on that one. It was a good interview. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I have to tell you that I didn't expect. I have this philosophy. One of my philosophies in life is, if there is a will, there is a way. I repeat this often, and I believe if there is a will, there's always a way. And when they were talking about how they are getting the numbers to call, it was so much easier than people think it is. So
Yeah,
I
that's what
recommend
they,
you
yeah.
to watch this, guys. Yeah, watch this interview Scott had with those two pranksters. Can you remind us the name of those two? I forgot the names. Lexus and
Vova and Lexus, something like that. Yeah.
one and Lexus, right? And they actually pranked Polish president, like.
Yeah. And they just published, in fact is, they just on their Telegram, they literally just published right here. They just pranked a French politician named Bernard Levy. And so if you go to their Telegram channel, they have the link there, and all that. So they're actively working. And I won't give away this, but I know who they have pranked, and I know what's in the bag, and I asked them about that, and they said it will be huge, and I can guarantee that when they finally put it out who they pranked, it will have. And this is the interesting thing about these two guys, because we're smiling about them because they're sort of comedians, they're pranksters, but they're the ones that exposed Poroshenko saying that Minsk was a sham. They've exposed all the lies. And I think they're going to show somebody who is very historic, and
oh,
the
now
lies.
you made me think. Now you made me think. You know who already, huh?
I know who, but I'm not going to say because that's their business. But it will be. I trust them when they say that this is going to be mind blowing. So we'll see. But these are guys that I believe deserve Pulitzer Prize as journalists for what they're doing, because they're doing more to expose the lies of people in power than mainstream journalists, and they've accomplished more in the interest of shedding light on facts. So in addition to just being really cool guys and great sense of humor, and their pranks are very clever, the product of what they do is very important for people who are searching for truth. They are literally the reconnaissance scouts out there finding truth for us.
Yes, and it's amazing how easy those politicians reveal those things, don't you think? How easy.
I mean, if I had committed half the crimes these people, I would never admit that to anybody. And yet they're out there. Oh yeah, we lied. Yeah, we did this. Oh, we didn't really mean that when we said it. What we're really trying to do is this. It's almost like they're happy to have a chance to confess that how clever they were. It's like, oh, look how clever I was. No, what you are is a scum. You're a liar who your lies have resulted in dead people. I mean, people don't realize that. The lies these guys are telling that they're so proud of, how clever they are, these politicians, they equal dead people. They're murderers.
Yes, and actually it just shows, right, Scott, before we end, it just shows how insecure and big ego they have, how insecure they are, how big ego they have, and how little intelligence, common sense, and wisdom in those people. Because if you share things like this, it's like, come on, hello, like, are you really sharing this? Like, Duda, are you really saying this?
Like, to give you an example, when I was in the military, I signed non-disclosure agreements about certain capabilities. Yeah, and I could write a really cool book about the stuff that I was read into and things like that, but I can't because I signed an NDA. That's the deal, and so it will go to my grave. And what I don't understand is if you're for whatever reason, if you believe in something enough to do it, because I'm not naive enough to believe that politicians never lie, but if you're going to lie, sustain the lie. When somebody calls you up, just say, say no, we wanted Minsk all along. It was the real deal. We needed Minsk. It's a shame the Russians never complied with it. We continue to blame Russia to this day. There's the lie. You could sustain that, and then you confuse everybody. They're like, gosh, but they're even to the pranksters. They said, we didn't know they were pranksters, but they're consistent with their lie. You're consistent with your lie. You create uncertainty as to what the truth is. But if you're going to sit there and say a lie in public, that's why This is why Julian Assange is in jail, because Julian Assange exposed the lies of Hillary Clinton and American diplomats by releasing the diplomatic cables, where you have Americans saying one thing in public, and then in their cables going back to Washington, D.C., saying the exact opposite, admitting to their lie. The pranksters are the guys that get to this truth. And what you see is that they all lie. Everybody lies. Yes. Nothing is true from the government. The government has forgotten how to tell the truth to the people they're supposed to be serving. And this is the same. The only honest person out there right now is Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin gets before the Russian people and tells them what's going on. This was treason. With Prigozhin, this was treason. This was an act of treason, an act of betrayal. He didn't try to soft pedal it. He got before the Russian mothers and said, biggest mistake I made was Minsk in 2014. I should have finished the war, but I didn't. But he's not out there playing stupid political games, deceiving people, all this. I'm not saying he's incapable of it. I think every politician is capable of telling a lie. But, if you put them all out there, the one guy who, if you got them all out there and got them to commit to something, the guy I'd believe would be Vladimir Putin. I'd still want to double check, trust but verify. But I would never believe a Polish politician. I would never believe a British politician. Damn sure never believe an American politician. The Russian, I'd say, okay, I'll take you at face value, but I'm going to need to check on it a little bit. But everybody else, I just say, I'm assuming you're lying.
I just had a feeling they're going to call Lavrov. That would be fun. Okay, Scott, I have a question.
Well, that would be interesting.
I'm close. I know. Scott, last question about NDA, because you said it. I want to ask you, when you sign NDA, and then you realize that government is actually committing a treason, okay? Can you break that NDA?
The NDA can never be used to conceal a crime. And you have a moral obligation.
Even if it's treason, if you witness treason.
No, what I'm saying, the NDA can never be used to cover up for a crime. So I signed an NDA.
Cover up. Okay.
I'm constitutionally obligated to expose crimes, to expose, but you have to be careful what defines a crime. Because if I sit there and say, well, you're not allowed to do that, but I didn't know that a presidential, that the president signed a presidential finding allowing the CIA to do that, my ignorance can't be used as a justification to break the NDA. Things like, but for instance, torture can never be allowed. So even though if I was involved in the CIA's torture program and I signed an NDA, but I'm there witnessing the torturing of somebody, that can never be allowed, ever, ever, ever. And you must speak out. You have an obligation to speak out. The NDA cannot be used. They can't say, well, you signed an NDA. So the NDA doesn't allow you to break the law. So, there's that, but you have to be very careful here. That's why you have, this is why whistleblower protections are so important, because you have to provide a way for people of honor who signed an NDA and they go, something ain't right here, to go and say, hey, boss, something's not right here. Now, you can go to the Inspector General. In theory, that should work. But the Inspector General didn't get to be Inspector General because he doesn't play the game. He got to be Inspector General because he plays the game. And so the Inspector General you have to be able to go to Congress. And you have to be able to go to Congress in a consequence-free environment. Now, Congress needs to hear it. But again, what you saw with Adam Schiff, it's come out that Adam Schiff was not, he's the head of the Intelligence Committee for the House. The man was a pure partisan, shill. He was there to destroy Trump, not there to do the truth. So if you have a broken whistleblower system, then you're going to get Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden was aware of massive violations of Fourth Amendment constitutional protections. But he had no faith and confidence in the whistleblower system to believe that had he initiated a complaint, that he wasn't the one that was going to be silenced. So he did what he believed. He violated every NDA he ever signed. He went out there and he released all this material. Broke the law. Massive violation of the law. But you'd have a hard time prosecuting him on the the things that he released that dealt with violations of the Fourth Amendment. Because you can't protect those with security, with classification. But he did release a lot of information that had nothing to do with that, information that did bring harm to the national security of the United States and its allies by revealing intelligence collection programs that, once they're shut down, deny us access to a stream of information that one could reasonably say we probably needed to know. I know there's a lot of people out there that don't like intelligence agencies. I understand why. But I am here to tell you that if you live in a dangerous world, the more you can inform your decision makers about the nature of the danger, the better that is they can come up with policies to address that in a way that reduces life. Now, that's in the perfect world. That implies that everything's being done honorably. And unfortunately, we live in a world where there's almost no honor today. And so you can't speak of adequate whistleblower protections right now. So the only way that you can address this is that people violate the NDA. Thank goodness I'm not in a position where I'm sitting on NDA protected information that puts me in a moral quandary. I was blessed in a way by being a United Nations official when I was in Iraq, because as a UN official, the US couldn't control any of the information that I had access to. Therefore, when I talked about the crimes, I could legally speak about it. I could legally go to Congress. I could legally go to the press. They did their best to shut me down, but what they could never do, and they tried to get me for treason. I don't think people understand that I was actually prosecuted for treason by Mary Jo White, the Southern District of New York lead prosecutor. And she never lost a case. She lost mine because she didn't have a case. But they tried me for treason. They tried me for any number of things, but they couldn't win in the end because I did everything legally. I violated no laws. Had I been a government official saying what I said, I'd be in Leavenworth right now. I'd be in a max prison in Colorado. But they couldn't, so people call me a whistleblower, but I wasn't a whistleblower. I was a truth teller. I'll accept that, but I wasn't a whistleblower because I didn't violate any laws. I didn't violate anything. I did it right. But I had the ability to do it right because I never signed a non-disclosure agreement that was enforceable. The United Nations didn't make me sign a non-disclosure agreement. The United States couldn't make me sign a non-disclosure agreement. But I can't talk about what I did as a Marine Corps intelligence officer, for instance, in certain cases, because that is protected by a non-disclosure agreement. Fortunately, nothing I did came close to violating the law or putting America in a morally questionable position. Everything I did was in service of my country and defense of my nation, and I'm proud of what I did.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Scott. I'm so glad that actually there still are some whistleblowers in this world that have courage and dignity to speak up.
We lost a great one, by the way, just to remind everybody. Daniel Ellsberg, the man who brought us the Pentagon Papers, who exposed the lies of the Vietnam War, passed away. He was he set the standard for integrity, and he's the kind of guy. He's a whistleblower that could easily have gone to jail for the rest of his life, and he was willing to do that. As he said when he was confronted with that harsh fact, the reporter asked him, "Are you willing to go to jail for what you did?" He said, "Wouldn't you go to jail to stop an unjust war, to stop this war?" That's the kind of courage we need more of. People willing to pay a heavy price to do the right thing.
Thank you. It's not about self-preservation, Scott, right? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to my moderators. I think Deborah was here. Thank you, Deborah, so much for helping me with the chat. And hopefully until next time, everyone, stay safe and all the best, guys.